The banker's hand slammed down on the deed, and Caleb Holloway understood in that moment that he had two choices: marry the woman standing rigid in the corner of the room, or watch his daughter grow up without land, without legacy, without the only home she'd ever known. Eliza Fairmont's jaw was set like iron, her gloved hands trembling with barely contained fury as the town's most powerful man smiled and pushed the marriage license across the scarred oak desk. Neither of them wanted this. Neither of them had a choice. And in 3 days, they would stand before God and witnesses and lie through their vows while the whole territory whispered about the desperate rancher and the spinster schoolteacher who'd finally been claimed. Stay with me through this story of pride, survival, and the kind of love that grows in the hardest soil. Comment below with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The Colorado sky held that particular quality of gray that promised either rain or mercy, and Caleb Holloway suspected it would deliver neither. He stood in the cramped office above the mercantile, hat turning slowly between calloused hands, while Martin Gaines, banker, land speculator, and the closest thing Silver Ridge had to a king, reviewed documents with the satisfied expression of a man who'd already won. "You understand the terms, Mr. Holloway?" Gaines didn't look up from the papers spread before him. His voice carried the smooth certainty of someone who'd never gone hungry, never felt dirt under his fingernails except by accident. "The loan comes due in full by month's end. $2,200 plus interest." "I know what I owe." Caleb's voice came out rougher than he intended. "I'm asking for an extension, 3 months. The cattle are ready for market in— 3 months ago you asked for 3 months. Gaines finally raised his eyes, pale blue and flat as creek stones. "Before that, 6 months. I've been remarkably patient, considering the circumstances." The circumstances. That was Gaines's favored phrase for the fever that had swept through the valley 2 winters back, taking Caleb's wife Sarah along with 17 others. The circumstances that left him with a 6-year-old daughter, a ranch running on determination and dust, and debts that multiplied like rabbits, while grief sat on his chest and made breathing an hourly decision. "I've made every payment I could." Caleb met the banker's stare without flinching. "My word's good." "Your word?" Gaines leaned back in his leather chair, the kind that cost more than most families earned in a season. "Yes, let's discuss your word. You've given me your word repeatedly, Mr. Holloway. Meanwhile, your late wife's medical bills remain outstanding, your property taxes are in arrears, and you've mortgaged every acre you own. Your word, I'm afraid, has depreciated considerably." Heat crawled up Caleb's neck. His hand stilled on the hat brim. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I hold legal claim to the Holloway Ranch as of next Monday, unless you can produce $2,200 in cash." Gaines pulled a fresh document from his desk drawer. "However, I'm prepared to offer an alternative arrangement." Something in the banker's tone made Caleb's shoulders tighten. He'd grown up reading weather, reading cattle, reading the subtle shifts that meant danger or opportunity, and every instinct he possessed was screaming warning. "What kind of arrangement?" Gaines smiled, not warmly. "Marriage." The word hung in the air like a thrown knife. "Marriage," Caleb repeated slowly, certain he'd misheard. "To Miss Eliza Fairmont." Gaines gestured toward the corner of the office, where a woman Caleb hadn't noticed sat ramrod straight in a wooden chair, her hands folded over a worn leather satchel. "You know Miss Fairmont, of course, our esteemed schoolteacher." Caleb turned. He'd seen Eliza Fairmont around town, tall, severe-looking woman with dark hair pulled back so tight it must give her headaches. She taught at the schoolhouse, lived in the boarding house, walked to church alone every Sunday. The kind of woman people discussed in that particular tone, reserved for spinsters and situations considered unfortunate. She was looking directly at him now, and her eyes were not what he expected. Brown and clear, and absolutely furious. "Mr. Gaines," she said, and her voice carried the crisp precision of someone used to commanding attention from rowdy children. "Perhaps you might explain to Mr. Holloway what you've so graciously explained to me." The sarcasm in graciously could have cut glass. Gaines's smile thinned. "Miss Fairmont finds herself in circumstances not unlike your own. Her boarding house rent is substantially overdue. The school board, which I chair, has decided that a married woman might provide a more stable moral example for our children, and I happen to hold the note on the building where she currently resides. You're blackmailing both of us. Eliza's words came flat and hard. Let's use accurate language. I'm offering solutions to mutual problems. Gaines opened the marriage license with a flourish. Mr. Holloway needs debt relief and a mother for his daughter. You, Miss Fairmont, need housing and social respectability. A marriage solves everything quite neatly. I'll forgive Mr. Holloway's debts entirely as a wedding gift, and you'll move to the ranch as his wife. The contract is quite clear. Caleb stared at the document. His chest felt tight. And if we refuse? Then Miss Fairmont will be evicted by week's end, and the school board will terminate her employment for moral turpitude. Living without means or proper supervision, you understand. And you, Mr. Holloway, will lose your ranch on Monday. Your daughter will lose her home. Gaines straightened the papers with meticulous care. I'll naturally purchase the property at the foreclosure auction. I've been wanting to expand my holdings in that direction. The room seemed to shrink. Caleb looked at Eliza Fairmont again. She was perhaps 30, though it was hard to tell with that severe hairstyle and the high-collared gray dress that seemed designed to make her invisible. Her jaw was clenched so tight he could see the muscle jump. This is insane, Caleb said. You can't just... I can, actually. It's all perfectly legal. Gaines tapped the documents. And frankly, I'm doing you both a favor. Miss Fairmont gains security and status. You keep your land and gain a woman to run your household. The child gets a mother. Everyone benefits. Except that neither of us chose this, Eliza said quietly. That seems rather significant. Choice is a luxury, Miss Fairmont. You of all people should understand that. Gaines pulled out his pocket watch, checked it with theatrical precision. I'll need your decision within the hour. I have other appointments. Caleb felt like he'd been kicked by a horse. The walls were too close, the air too thin. He thought of Katie, his daughter, barely old enough to remember her mother's face. Thought of the ranch Sarah had loved, the home they'd built. Thought of everything he'd lose come Monday if he walked out of this office. He looked at Eliza Fairmont one more time. Her face was pale but composed, though her hands had tightened on the satchel until her knuckles showed white. Could we, she said carefully, have a moment to discuss this privately? Gaines waved a magnanimous hand toward the door. The hallway. 10 minutes. The hallway outside Gaines's office smelled of sawdust and leather goods from the mercantile below. Caleb leaned against the wall, hat still turning in his hands, while Eliza Fairmont stood at the opposite wall with the rigid posture of someone holding themselves together through pure will. For a long moment, neither spoke. I don't even know you, Caleb finally said. No, Eliza's voice was steady. But I know you have a daughter, Katie, age 6. Bright child, good at arithmetic. She sits in the second row and draws horses in the margins of her slate when she thinks I'm not watching. Despite everything, Caleb felt a faint pull at his mouth. Sounds like Katie. I also know you've been trying to hold that ranch together with your bare hands since your wife died. Eliza met his eyes. The whole town knows. They discuss it endlessly. Poor Mr. Holloway, they say. Someone should help. But no one does, of course, except to whisper about how you're failing. The words stung because they were true. And you? Caleb asked. What do they whisper about you? That I'm 29 years old and unmarried, which apparently makes me either pitiable or suspicious depending on who's talking. Eliza's mouth twisted. That I'm too educated, too opinionated, too plain, that I should be grateful for any offer of marriage, regardless of circumstances. That I'm, and I quote, drying up like old leather. That's cruel. That's honest. Eliza smoothed her skirt with precise movements. I came to Silver Ridge 5 years ago to escape similar talk in Kansas. Apparently geography doesn't matter when you're a woman who made the mistake of being intelligent instead of beautiful. Caleb studied her more carefully. In the dim hallway light, away from Gaines's calculating stare, Eliza Fairmont didn't look severe so much as guarded. Her features were actually quite fine, straight nose, good cheekbones, expressive eyes. But everything about her presentation seemed designed to minimize, to deflect attention, to survive by being overlooked. If we do this, he said slowly, what exactly would you expect? Honestly? Eliza turned to face him fully. I don't know. I've never been married. Never particularly wanted to be, if I'm being truthful. I enjoy teaching. I enjoy my independence, but Mr. Gaines has made it clear that my choices are marriage or destitution, and I'm not quite desperate enough to throw myself on my family's mercy back in Kansas." Her voice hardened. "They'd enjoy that far too much." "So this would be, Caleb struggled for words. "An arrangement, businesslike." "I suppose it would have to be." Eliza's hands tightened on her satchel again. "I won't pretend to be something I'm not, Mr. Holloway. I'm not your late wife. I can't replace her. I won't try. But I can keep house, I can teach your daughter, and I can be civil. Would that be enough?" "Would it?" Caleb thought of Sarah, of the love that had grown slow and steady between them over 9 years of marriage. Thought of how the house felt empty without her, how he'd kept her dress hanging in the wardrobe because removing it felt like losing her twice. Could he share that space with a stranger? Could he ask Katie to accept a new mother who wasn't a mother at all, just a woman cornered into playing the role? "I don't know," he admitted. It's insane. We should tell Gaines to go to hell." "We should." Eliza's voice softened slightly. "But we won't. Because he's holding all the cards and he knows it. He'll take your ranch, Mr. Holloway. He'll evict me. And he'll smile while doing it because men like Martin Gaines don't make threats they can't execute." The truth of it settled over Caleb like winter fog. He looked down at his hat, at the sweat-stained crown and battered brim. Working man's hat, poor man's hat, not the hat of someone who could fight bankers and win. "If we do this," he said, "I can't promise much. The ranch is barely surviving. You'd be working harder than you ever did teaching. The house needs repairs I can't afford. Katie's—" He paused. "She's still grieving. She might not accept you." "I'm aware of the challenges." Eliza straightened her shoulders. "But I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Holloway. I've been running a schoolhouse full of 30 children for 5 years. I can learn ranch work. I can be patient with your daughter, and I can be a wife in name, if that's what's required to keep us both from ruin." "In name," Caleb repeated. "You mean separate rooms, separate lives where possible." Eliza's cheeks colored faintly, but her gaze stayed steady. "I'm agreeing to a legal arrangement, not a love match. I think we should be clear about that." It should have been a relief. Instead, Caleb felt something that might have been disappointment mixed with a strange sense of loss for something he'd never have. He pushed the feeling aside. "All right." The words came out rough. "All right, we'll do it. But I need you to understand something, Miss Fairmont. I will keep you safe. I will treat you with respect. You'll have a home for as long as you want it. That's my word. And whatever Gaines thinks, my word still means something." For the first time, Eliza's expression softened. Just slightly. Just enough to suggest that beneath the armor, there was a person who maybe wanted to believe him. "Then I accept your word, Mr. Holloway, and I'll give you mine in return. I won't abandon your daughter. I won't speak ill of your late wife's memory, and I will do everything in my power to help you keep that ranch." She held out her hand. "Do we have an agreement?" Her hand was slim and pale in the dim light, but when Caleb took it, her grip was firm, steady, the handshake of someone who meant what they said. "We have an agreement." They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, two people who'd just bound themselves to a future neither wanted. Then Eliza released his hand and turned toward Gaines's office door. "Then let's inform Mr. Gaines that he's won. For now." The way she said "for now" made Caleb wonder if perhaps he'd underestimated the schoolteacher with the severe hair and the furious eyes. The wedding took place 3 days later in the Silver Ridge Church, with a gathering of witnesses that felt more like spectators at a hanging. Reverend Morrison performed the ceremony with obvious discomfort, rushing through the vows as if speed might somehow make the proceedings less distasteful. Caleb wore his only good suit, brushed clean and smelling of cedar and mothballs. Eliza wore a simple blue dress, not white, which would have been laughable under the circumstances, with her hair still pulled back in that unforgiving style. No flowers, no music, no pretense that this was anything other than what it was. A transaction dressed in the trappings of matrimony. Katie sat in the front pew beside Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring ranch, small and silent in her Sunday dress. She hadn't cried when Caleb explained that Miss Fairmont would be coming to live with them, would be her new mother. She just looked at him with Sarah's eyes. Katie had her mother's eyes, would always have them, and nodded once before returning to the wooden horse she carried everywhere. The whole church whispered. Caleb could hear the susurrus of scandal behind every "I do." Poor Mr. Holloway, forced to marry the spinster. She must be desperate, taking a widower with a child. What kind of mother could she be, that dried-up thing? Gaines must have twisted some arms for this. Caleb's jaw tightened. Beside him, Eliza stood perfectly still, her expression revealing nothing. But he noticed the way her hands trembled slightly as she repeated her vows. Noticed the careful breath she took before slipping the thin gold band, his mother's ring, the only one he had, onto her finger. When Morrison finally pronounced them married, there was no kiss, just a brief nod between two people who'd sealed a bargain, and then they were walking back down the aisle while the congregation watched with avid eyes and eager mouths. Outside, the gray sky had finally delivered. Rain came down steady and cold, turning the street to mud and sending wedding guests scattering for cover. Caleb's wagon waited at the hitching post, the mare patient, in her traces. "Mrs. Henderson's bringing Katie out in a minute," Caleb said, staring at the rain. "We should wait." "Of course." Eliza pulled her thin shawl tighter. She had no coat, he realized. No proper traveling clothes. Whatever belongings she owned would fit in that worn satchel and maybe one trunk. She'd given up everything to marry a man she didn't love, to save herself from circumstances not of her making. The thought settled in Caleb's chest like a stone. "Here." He shrugged out of his suit jacket, held it toward her. "You'll catch your death." Eliza looked at the jacket, then at him. For a moment he thought she'd refuse, pride written clear in the set of her shoulders. Then she took it with a quiet, "Thank you," and draped it over her shoulders. Katie emerged from the church holding Mrs. Henderson's hand, the wooden horse tucked under one arm. She looked small and uncertain, dark hair plastered to her head by the rain. When she saw Eliza wearing Caleb's jacket, something flickered across her face. Not quite anger, not quite fear. Something that looked like the careful blankness children adopt when they're trying not to feel. "Ready, Katie girl?" Caleb crouched down to his daughter's level. Katie nodded, said nothing. "Miss Fairmont, Mrs. Holloway, I mean, is going to ride with us. That all right?" Another nod. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. "Mama had a blue dress?" The words hit like a fist. Caleb saw Eliza stiffen, saw her glance down at her own blue dress, and understand immediately what Katie was saying. Not that the dresses were similar. That wearing blue was somehow claiming something that didn't belong to her. "Your mama's dresses are still in the wardrobe," Eliza said gently. "I won't touch them. They're yours and your father's to keep." Katie looked up at her with those serious, too old eyes. "You're not my mama." "No," Eliza agreed. "I'm not. I'm just someone who's come to help. If you'll let me." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even particularly warm. But it was honest, and Katie seemed to recognize that. She looked at her father, then back at Eliza, then climbed into the wagon without another word. The ride to the ranch took an hour through rain that never quite stopped. Katie sat between Caleb and Eliza on the wagon seat, a small barrier of silence and grief. Eliza kept her hands folded in her lap, her borrowed jacket growing damp, her gaze fixed on the muddy road ahead. When the ranch finally came into view, Caleb tried to see it through her eyes. The house needed paint. The barn roof sagged on one side. The corral fence had gaps he kept meaning to fix. Everything looked tired and worn and barely held together, which was accurate, he supposed. That's exactly what it was. "It's not much," he said as they pulled up to the house. "It's a home." Eliza climbed down from the wagon, her skirts immediately soaking up mud from the yard. "That's more than I had yesterday." Inside, the house was cold. Caleb had banked the fire that morning, but hadn't left enough wood to keep it going. The main room served as kitchen and living space combined, with two small bedrooms off the back. Sarah's touches were everywhere. The curtains she'd sewn, the rag rug she'd braided, the china cups she'd insisted on keeping even when money was tight. Eliza stood in the center of the room, dripping rainwater, taking it all in. Katie had already disappeared into her bedroom, the door clicking shut with quiet finality. "The room on the right is Katie's," Caleb said, suddenly aware of how small the house felt with this stranger inside it. "The left was, that can be yours." I'll sleep out here on the settee. That's not necessary, Eliza set her satchel down. The floor is fine, or I can... You'll take the room. His voice came out sharper than intended. I won't have my wife sleeping on the floor. Agreement or not, you're entitled to decent accommodation. Eliza's eyebrows rose slightly. Your wife? That's going to take some getting used to. For both of us. Caleb moved to the stove, began building up the fire. I'll bring in your trunk tomorrow. Tonight there's stew from yesterday if you're hungry. Or I can... Mr. Holloway. Eliza's voice stopped him. When he turned, she was pulling off the wet jacket, hanging it carefully over a chair. I appreciate your hospitality, truly. But we don't need to pretend. This is your home. I'm just here. Tell me what you need me to do, and I'll do it. Otherwise, I'll try to stay out of your way. Something about the resignation in her voice, the careful way she positioned herself as temporary, disposable. It sparked an unfamiliar anger in Caleb's chest. This is your home now, too, he said firmly. We made vows. They might have been forced, but they were real. You're not a guest here, Eliza. You're my wife, and that means something to me, even if the circumstances are... He gestured helplessly. This. For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then something in her expression shifted, softened, maybe even looked relieved. All right, she said quietly. All right. Then tell me where you keep the dishes, and I'll heat that stew while you get out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia. It was such a mundane thing, a wife telling her husband to change his clothes, but in that moment it felt almost normal. Almost like they were just people starting a life together, instead of two desperate souls bound by blackmail and rain. Caleb showed her the dishes. Eliza moved around the kitchen with careful efficiency, learning where things lived, how the stove drew, the way the pump handle stuck. He changed in his bedroom, not his and Sarah's bedroom anymore, just his, and tried not to think about the woman in his kitchen who wore his mother's ring and his name, but nothing of his heart. When he emerged, she'd set 3 places at the table, had even put out the china cups filled with water from the pump. The stew was bubbling on the stove, filling the room with the smell of beef and turnips. Should I call Katie? Eliza asked. Caleb looked at the closed bedroom door, thought about his daughter in there, probably clutching her wooden horse and trying to understand why her father had brought home a stranger to replace her mother. Give her a few minutes. She'll come out when she's ready. They waited. The stew cooled slightly. The rain drummed on the roof. And finally, quietly, Katie's door opened. She stood in the doorway in her nightgown, hair loose around her shoulders, wooden horse in hand, looking so small and lost that Caleb's throat tightened. There's stew, he said gently. You hungry? Katie looked at the table, at the 3-place settings, at Eliza standing by the stove in Sarah's kitchen, wearing Sarah's apron. When had she put on the apron? And something crumpled in the little girl's expression. I want Mama, she whispered. The words broke something in the room. I know, baby, I know. Caleb crossed to her, knelt down. Mama's not coming back, but Miss Fairmont. I don't want Miss Fairmont. Katie's voice rose, tears starting. I want Mama. You said Mama would come back. You said. Katie, I hate you. She threw the wooden horse. It clattered across the floor, hit the wall. I hate you, and I hate her, and I want Mama. She fled back into her room, slammed the door. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Caleb stayed kneeling on the floor, feeling like he'd been gutted. Behind him, he heard Eliza move, heard water being poured. When he finally stood and turned, she was at the table, carefully removing Katie's plate, her movements precise and controlled. I'm sorry, he said roughly. She's grieving. She's 6 years old, and her father just brought home a stranger to be her mother. Eliza's voice was carefully neutral. I'd hate me too, under the circumstances. She doesn't hate you. She doesn't even know you. Exactly. Eliza met his eyes. And that's the problem, isn't it? We're all strangers here, Mr. Holloway, forced into proximity and expected to become a family overnight. Your daughter has every right to be angry. I didn't have a choice. Neither did she. Eliza turned back to the stove. Sit, eat. I'll leave Katie's plate warming if she changes her mind. They ate in silence, the ghost of a child's grief hanging between them. The stew tasted like sawdust in Caleb's mouth. Across the table, Eliza chewed methodically, her gaze distant, and he wondered what she was thinking. Whether she was regretting the choice. Whether she wanted to run back to town and take her chances with Gaines, an eviction rather than face a child's hatred and a house full of ghosts. My mother died when I was 7, Eliza said suddenly, quietly. Cholera. I screamed at my father for weeks afterward, told him I hated him for letting her die. Told him I'd never forgive him. She set down her spoon. Eventually I stopped screaming, but I don't think I ever truly forgave him. Not for her death, but for surviving it, for moving on, for expecting me to do the same. Caleb didn't know what to say to that. Katie will survive this, Eliza continued. Children are remarkably resilient, but she'll remember. The anger, the grief, the fact that she didn't get a choice, we should both remember that. I'll talk to her in the morning. Don't. Eliza stood, began clearing the dishes. Not yet. Let her be angry. She's earned it. She paused at the pump, back to him. We all have. And there it was. The acknowledgement that Eliza herself was angry, grieving her lost independence, cornered into a life she never wanted. That she was surviving this, not celebrating it. Caleb wanted to say something. Wanted to thank her, or apologize, or maybe just acknowledge that they were all broken people trying to fit their jagged edges together without causing more damage. But before he could find words, Eliza spoke again. I'll wash up. You should check on your daughter. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a gentle dismissal. A reminder that whatever arrangement they'd made, Katie was his responsibility, his child, his grief to manage. He stood, nodded, moved toward Katie's door. Inside, he found his daughter curled on her narrow bed, wooden horse retrieved and clutched to her chest, tears still wet on her cheeks. She didn't look at him when he sat on the edge of the bed. I'm sorry, Katie girl. I'm sorry for all of this. She said nothing. Miss Fairmont, Mrs. Holloway, she's not trying to replace your mama. Nobody could do that. Your mama was... His voice cracked. She was special, and she loved you more than anything in this world. Then why did she leave? Katie's voice was so small. She didn't want to. She got sick, remember? The fever. She fought so hard to stay, but sometimes... He swallowed hard. Sometimes people leave even when they don't want to, even when we need them. And it's not fair and it hurts, but we have to keep living. Mama would want us to keep living. With her? Katie's tear-filled eyes finally met his, gesturing toward the closed door and the stranger in their kitchen. Mrs. Holloway is here to help us. That's all. You don't have to call her Mama if you don't want to. You don't have to love her. Just... He brushed Katie's hair back from her face. Try not to hate her. She's just trying to survive too. Katie considered this with the seriousness children bring to impossible situations. Finally, she nodded. Just once. Just enough. It wasn't acceptance, but it was a start. Caleb stayed with her until she fell asleep. Wooden horse tucked under her chin, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythms of exhausted childhood. When he finally emerged, the kitchen was clean, the dishes put away, and Eliza's door was closed. He stood in the middle of his house, their house now, and listened to the rain and the silence and tried to imagine how any of this could possibly work. Outside, the storm showed no signs of breaking, and in Silver Ridge, Martin Gaines would be sleeping soundly, satisfied with his victory, unaware that the marriage he'd forced might contain seeds of something he hadn't anticipated. Resistance. The rain stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the world washed clean and somehow emptier. Caleb woke on the settee with his neck cramped and his shirt twisted, the gray light filtering through Sarah's curtains, revealing a house that felt both familiar and strange. He could hear movement in the kitchen, quiet, careful sounds of someone trying not to disturb, and realized that Eliza was already awake. When he emerged from behind the blanket he'd rigged for privacy, she was at the stove with her hair in a loose braid down her back, still wearing yesterday's dress. The coffee was already made, strong enough that he could smell it from across the room. Morning, he said, his voice rough with sleep. She glanced over her shoulder. Good morning. I hope I didn't wake you. I'm not accustomed to sleeping past sunrise. School teacher habits? Survival habits. She poured coffee into one of Sarah's china cups, handed it to him. My boarding house room faced east. The sun made sleeping in impossible, even if I'd wanted to. Caleb wrapped his hands around the cup, grateful for the warmth. Through the window, he could see the ranch spreading out under a sky scrubbed pale blue by yesterday's storm. The fence still needed mending. The barn roof still sagged. Nothing had changed except everything. I should check on the cattle, he said. Storm might have spooked them through the fence line. I'll start breakfast. What does Katie usually eat? Whatever's available. She's not particular. He paused. She might not come out while you're here. Then I'll leave a plate warming. Eliza's tone suggested she'd expected nothing different. Go. Do what needs doing. We'll manage. It was strange being dismissed from his own kitchen by a woman who'd been his wife for less than a day. But there was something almost comforting about it too, the sense that someone else was shouldering part of the burden, even if neither of them wanted the arrangement. Outside, the morning was cold and bright. The cattle had indeed pushed through a weak section of fence, but not far. He found them grazing peacefully in the meadow beyond, 17 head that represented his entire herd and most of his remaining hope for solvency. They'd need to go to market soon, before winter set in and the prices dropped. The money would have to carry them through to spring, if they made it to spring. He was mending the fence when he heard footsteps behind him, turned to find Eliza picking her way across the muddy ground in her thin shoes, carrying something wrapped in cloth. You forgot breakfast, she said, holding out the bundle. Biscuits and bacon. I would have brought coffee, but I couldn't find a canteen. In the barn. But you didn't need to come all the way out here. I needed to see the property. She looked around with the same assessing gaze she'd used on the house. Understand what I'm dealing with. And what are you dealing with? A working ranch that's been neglected. She said it without judgment, just statement of fact. The barn needs re-shingling. That corral gate hangs crooked. The chicken coop. You have chickens? 6. They're not laying much. They need better feed and the coop cleaned out. Chickens are sensitive to filth. She turned in a slow circle, taking in the outbuildings, the fields, the distant tree line. How much land? 300 acres. Half of it decent grazing, quarter in timber. Rest is rocky ground that's good for nothing but breaking plow blades. Water? Creek runs year-round through the north section, well by the house. He studied her. You sound like you know ranching. I grew up on a farm in Kansas. Wheat and pigs, mostly. My father believed daughters should work same as sons. Her mouth tightened. Right up until he decided to sell the farm and move to town after my mother died. Apparently running a farm required a wife, but raising a daughter didn't require a home. There was old pain in those words, carefully contained. Caleb unwrapped the biscuits. They were good, better than anything he'd made in months, and considered what to say. I'm sorry. That must have been hard. It was illuminating. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself against the morning chill. I learned that women are expected to provide labor without ownership, support without authority, and gratitude for being allowed to exist in spaces men control. The schoolteacher position was the first time I've had anything that was truly mine. And now Gaines took that too. He tried. Her voice hardened. The school board can't legally terminate me for being married. That was a bluff, but the eviction was real, and fighting it would have cost more than I could afford. So here I am, married to a stranger, learning to be a rancher's wife instead of my own person. The bitterness in her tone was raw and honest. Caleb found himself respecting her more for not hiding it. For what it's worth, he said, you can still teach. Katie needs it, and probably some of the other ranch children around here could use lessons if you wanted to start something small. You don't have to give up everything. Eliza looked at him with something like surprise. You'd allow that? I'm not in the business of forbidding my wife from using her mind. Seems like a waste of a good education. He gestured at the ranch around them. There's plenty of work here, but if you can manage both, I won't stop you. For the first time since he'd met her, Eliza smiled. It was small and tentative, but genuine. Thank you. That's more than I expected. They stood there in the muddy field, a man and a woman bound by circumstances beyond their control, finding small mercies in unexpected places. Then Katie's voice called from the house, high and uncertain, and Eliza's smile faded. I should go back. She's probably looking for you. Probably. But Caleb didn't move immediately. Eliza, yesterday, what you said about your mother, about not forgiving your father, do you think Katie will end up the same way with me? I don't know. Eliza's honesty was almost harsh. Children remember everything, and they forgive very little. But you're trying. That counts for something. And unlike my father, you're not pretending everything is fine. You're acknowledging the difficulty. Maybe that will make a difference. She walked back toward the house before he could respond, her thin dress already soaked from the wet grass, her shoes caked with mud. Watching her go, Caleb thought about the schoolteacher who'd rather ruin her clothes than let him go hungry, and wondered if maybe Martin Gaines had miscalculated what kind of woman he'd forced into this arrangement. The day passed in the rhythm of ranch work, mending, feeding, mucking out stalls. Caleb saw Eliza moving around the property throughout the morning, taking inventory with the teacher's methodical attention. She cleaned out the chicken coop like she'd been doing it her whole life, emerged covered in feathers and dirt, and went straight to examining the garden plot behind the house that Sarah had planted and Caleb had let go to weeds. Katie stayed inside until noon, then crept out to sit on the porch steps with her wooden horse, watching Eliza work with suspicious eyes. Neither spoke to the other, but when Eliza paused to drink water from the pump, Katie didn't run away. She just watched, silent and wary as a feral cat. By evening, Caleb's body ached in the familiar way of hard labor, but the ranch looked slightly less desperate. The fence was solid. The barn door hung properly. Small victories that felt enormous under the circumstances. Inside, Eliza had made dinner, actual dinner, not just warmed-over stew. Fried chicken and biscuits and greens from somewhere, though the garden was overgrown. She'd set the table again, 3 places, and this time when Katie emerged, she came slowly to the table and sat without a word. They ate in silence, broken only by the scrape of forks on plates. Katie picked at her food, shooting glances at Eliza when she thought no one was watching. Eliza ate with precise, careful movements, like someone trying very hard not to take up too much space. "Where'd the chicken come from?" Caleb finally asked. "Your chickens. One wasn't laying and looked sick, so I culled it." Eliza said it matter-of-factly. "The greens were growing wild by the creek. Watercress. It'll be gone once frost hits, so we might as well use it now. You know how to butcher chickens?" "I know how to do a lot of things, Mr. Holloway. My father didn't believe in raising useless daughters." There was that edge again, that hint of old wounds. Though apparently I was still useless enough to abandon once I wasn't convenient anymore. Katie was watching Eliza now with open curiosity. "Did your papa leave you?" "Katie," Caleb warned gently. "It's all right." Eliza met the child's gaze directly. "Yes. After my mother died, he sold our farm and moved to town. I was 14. He sent me to live with my aunt and uncle, who made it very clear I was a burden. So when I was old enough, I became a teacher. It was either that or marry someone I didn't love, and I thought teaching was the better option." "But you married Papa anyway." Katie's logic was child-simple and devastating. "So you married someone you don't love?" Eliza's fork paused halfway to her mouth. For a moment, Caleb thought she might lie, might offer some gentle fiction about choosing to be here. Instead, she set down her fork and folded her hands. "You're right, I did. Because sometimes adults have to make choices that aren't about love. They're about survival. Your father needed help keeping this ranch, and I needed a place to live. We made an agreement to help each other. That's the truth." "But Mama and Papa loved each other." Katie's voice was very small. "Mama said so." "I'm sure they did." Eliza's tone softened. "And I'm sure your father still loves your mother very much. I'm not here to replace that love, Katie. I couldn't even if I wanted to. I'm just here to help, that's all." It wasn't a declaration of affection or family unity. It was honest and simple and somehow exactly what was needed. Katie studied Eliza for a long moment, then returned to her chicken without another word. But she ate more than she had the night before, and when she finished, she didn't immediately flee to her room. "Can I be excused?" she asked, looking at her father. "Clear your plate first." Katie did, carrying her dishes to the sideboard where Eliza had set up a washing station. Then she paused, looked at Eliza, and said very quietly, "The chicken was good." It wasn't much. It wasn't, "I accept you," or "I'll try to like you," but it was something other than hatred, and Eliza clearly recognized it as the gift it was. "Thank you, Katie. That's kind of you to say." Katie nodded once, then disappeared into her room. The door closed, but this time it didn't slam. Caleb and Eliza finished their meal in silence. She cleared the table and began washing up while he sat with his coffee and watched her move around the kitchen with increasing familiarity. After 3 days, she already knew where things belonged, how the stove drew, the trick to the pump handle. "You're good with her," he said finally. "With Katie. The honesty. She needed that. Children always know when you're lying." Eliza scrubbed a plate with focused attention. "They might not say so, but they know. And they lose respect for you. I learned that teaching. The students I was honest with, even when the truth was hard, they were the ones who trusted me." Sarah used to say the same thing. Eliza's hand stilled in the wash water. "I'm sorry. I know hearing about her must be difficult. It's all right to talk about her. She was Katie's mother. She was my wife. Pretending she didn't exist won't make this easier." Caleb turned his cup in his hands. She'd probably laugh at this whole situation, actually. Sarah had a dark sense of humor about life's cruelties. She'd say something about God having a twisted sense of irony, forcing me to marry the town spinster. He realized what he'd said a moment too late, looked up to find Eliza's back rigid, her shoulders tight. "I didn't mean that came out wrong." "No, it came out exactly right." Her voice was carefully controlled. "That's what I am, after all, the town spinster. The old maid nobody wanted until you were forced to take me. I'm aware of my status, Mr. Holloway. You don't need to pretend otherwise." "I'm not pretending. I'm just—" He stood, frustrated with himself, with the situation, with his inability to navigate conversation without causing damage. "I'm trying to say that Sarah would have liked your honesty. That's all. She'd have respected you for not pretending this is something it's not." Eliza turned from the wash basin, her hands dripping, her expression unreadable. Would she have? Or would she have hated me for taking her place? "You're not taking her place. I'm sleeping in her house, using her kitchen, raising her daughter. What would you call it?" "Surviving." The word came out rougher than he intended. "Same as me. Same as Katie. We're all just surviving the best we can with what we've been given." They stared at each other across the small kitchen, two people trying to find footing on constantly shifting ground. Then Eliza turned back to the dishes. "I suppose that's true enough. Though some of us have more practice at survival than others." She pulled the plug, watched the water drain. "I'm going to bed. Morning comes early on a ranch. I remember that much from childhood." "Eliza." She paused at her bedroom door. "Thank you for today, for the food, for the work, for being honest with Katie. I know this isn't what you wanted, but thank you." For a long moment she didn't respond, then quietly, "You're welcome. And Mr. Holloway, thank you for not pretending this is easy. That helps more than you know." She disappeared into her room, the door closing with a soft click. Caleb sat alone in his kitchen with his cold coffee and the weight of impossible circumstances, and wondered how long any of them could maintain this careful dance of honesty and distance before something broke. The answer came sooner than he expected. 2 days later, on a bright cold morning that promised early frost, Martin Gaines rode out to the ranch with 2 men Caleb didn't recognize. They wore suits too fine for ranch country and expressions that suggested they were used to getting their way. Caleb was in the barn when he heard the horses. Came out to find Gaines dismounting in the yard while Eliza stood on the porch with a dish towel in her hands, her face carefully blank. "Mr. Holloway." Gaines smiled his banker's smile. "I thought I'd check on my newlyweds, see how domestic life is treating you." "We're managing." Caleb wiped his hands on his trousers, positioning himself between Gaines and the house. "What do you want?" "Just a friendly visit." Gaines gestured to his companions. "Mr. Sullivan here is a surveyor from Denver. Mr. Petty is a lawyer. I'm having some of my properties assessed for future development, and since your land is now, shall we say, under my protection, I thought it appropriate to include it in the survey." Everything in Caleb went cold and still. The debt's forgiven. You said, the debt is forgiven. Absolutely. I'm a man of my word. Gaines's smile never wavered. But forgiven doesn't mean forgotten. I still hold the note, Mr. Holloway. It's simply marked as satisfied due to your marriage, which means if that marriage were to dissolve, say through abandonment or failure to fulfill marital duties, the debt would be reinstated. That's not legal, Eliza said from the porch. Her voice carried clear and sharp across the yard. You can't hold a satisfied debt as collateral for behavior. Gaines turned his smile on her. Mrs. Holloway, how lovely you look. Marriage clearly agrees with you. He tilted his head. And actually, my dear, you'll find that the contract your husband signed gives me considerable latitude. The debt satisfaction is conditional on the marriage remaining intact and both parties residing on the property. Should either condition fail, the full amount becomes due immediately. You son of a... Caleb started forward. Caleb. Eliza's voice stopped him. She descended from the porch, still holding that dish towel, her chin lifted. Mr. Gaines, I've read enough contracts to know that conditional debt satisfaction requires explicit language and witnessed acknowledgement. Did my husband sign such an agreement? The banker's smile thinned. The language is quite clear to anyone who understands legal terminology. I understand legal terminology perfectly well. I also understand that threatening parties with reinstatement of fraudulently forgiven debt is grounds for complaint to the territorial governor's office. Eliza's tone could have frozen the creek. Would you like me to write that letter, Mr. Gaines? I'm quite literate. I could include details about how you coerced this marriage through financial manipulation and false promises. The yard went very quiet. Sullivan and Petty exchanged glances. Gaines's expression hardened. You're making accusations without evidence, Mrs. Holloway. Am I? How many other families in Silver Ridge are you bleeding dry with similar arrangements? How many debts have you forgiven on condition of behaviors you can arbitrarily deem violations? She took a step forward. I may have been forced into this marriage, but I'm still a schoolteacher. I still have connections. People listen to me, Mr. Gaines. Would you like to test how far my voice carries? You're in over your head, little schoolteacher. Perhaps, but I can swim quite well when necessary. She folded her arms. Now, I believe you've completed your friendly visit. Please leave our property. This property is ours. Caleb found his voice, stepped up beside Eliza. The marriage is legal. We're both residing here. The debt is satisfied, which means you've got no business here unless you're willing to state your real purpose in front of witnesses. Gaines looked between them, the desperate rancher and the sharp-tongued schoolteacher who'd somehow found common ground, and his calculation was visible. He'd expected submission, gratitude, fear. Instead, he'd found resistance. Very well. He turned to remount. Enjoy your marital bliss. But remember, Mr. Holloway, conditions can be violated in many ways, some obvious, some subtle. I'd hate for any misunderstandings to jeopardize your happiness. He rode off with his surveyor and lawyer, leaving Caleb and Eliza standing in the yard as dust settled around them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Did you mean that? Caleb finally asked. About writing to the governor? I have no idea if the governor would care. But Gaines doesn't know that. Eliza's hands were shaking, he noticed, the dish towel trembling in her grip. I'm sorry if I overstepped. It's your land, your debt. I shouldn't have... You were magnificent. The words came out before he could stop them. I've wanted to tell Gaines to go to hell for 2 years. You just did it with better grammar. Eliza laughed. It was short and slightly hysterical, but genuine. I probably just made everything worse. Or you bought us time to figure out what he's actually planning. Caleb looked toward where Gaines had disappeared down the road. Why send a surveyor? If the debt's satisfied, what's he measuring? His future holdings, I'd wager. He's planning something. She turned toward the house, still shaking. We need to find out what. We? She met his eyes. You said this was my home now. That means it's my fight too. Something shifted in that moment. Some invisible line crossed. They weren't just two people trapped in an arrangement anymore. They were allies against a common threat. It wasn't love, wasn't even friendship yet. But it was something stronger than either of them had expected when they'd shaken hands in that dim hallway above the mercantile. "Then we fight together," Caleb said. "Whatever Gaines is planning, we face it together." Eliza nodded once, decisive. "Together. Now I need to sit down before I fall down. Confronting powerful men is apparently more exhausting than I anticipated." They went inside where Katie was hiding behind the door, wooden horse clutched tight, her eyes wide. "Is the bad man going to take our house?" "No." Eliza crouched down to the child's level, her voice firm despite the trembling in her hands. "He's not going to take anything. Your father and I won't let him. Promise?" "I promise. Cross my heart." Eliza made the gesture solemnly. "We're a family now, Katie, and families protect each other." Katie considered this. Then slowly she held out the wooden horse. "Mama gave me this. Papa made it for her first, but she gave it to me when she got sick. It's beautiful." Eliza touched the worn wood gently. "Your papa is very skilled. He made lots of things for Mama. She kept them all." Katie looked up at her father. "Can we show her?" Caleb's throat tightened. "Katie, I don't think—" "Please. If she's family now, she should see Mama's things so she knows." It was the first time Katie had called Eliza family, even indirectly. The first time she'd suggested including her in something precious, and Caleb found he couldn't refuse despite the ache in his chest. "All right. Come on." He led them to his bedroom, Sarah's bedroom, their bedroom, the room he'd been avoiding as much as possible. Inside, everything was as she'd left it. Her dresses in the wardrobe, her brush on the dresser, the small wooden box he'd carved for their first anniversary, containing her letters and ribbons, and the pressed flower from their wedding day. Katie climbed onto the bed and opened the box with careful hands. Mama loved Papa's carving. He made her a new thing every year for their anniversary. Eliza stood in the doorway, not entering, respecting the sanctity of the space. But she watched as Katie pulled out each piece, a bird, a flower, a tiny horse that matched the larger one Katie carried, a heart with their initials carved inside. "Your papa is very talented," Eliza said softly. "He doesn't make things anymore." Katie's voice was matter-of-fact. "Not since Mama died. He says his hands forgot how." Caleb flinched. He hadn't realized Katie had noticed, had understood why the wood scraps in the barn stayed untouched, why he'd stopped the evening carving sessions that had once been his way of relaxing after long days. "Maybe his hands just need time to remember," Eliza suggested. "Sometimes when we lose someone we love, we forget pieces of ourselves. But they come back eventually, if we're patient." Katie carefully replaced each item in the box, closed it, and looked at Eliza with those two serious eyes. "Do you think Mama would like you?" The question hung in the air, impossible and necessary. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. Maybe. I hope so." She chose her words carefully. "I think your Mama would want someone here who cares about keeping her family safe, who tries to be honest and fair. Whether she'd like me as a person, that I can't say, but I hope she'd approve of me trying to help." It was the right answer. Katie nodded, satisfied, and slid off the bed. "I'm going to feed the chickens now. You need to show Mrs. Holloway how. She fed them too much yesterday and they got stomach aches." She left with the confidence of a child who'd just resolved something important in her mind. Caleb and Eliza remained in the bedroom doorway, surrounded by ghosts and grief and the faint smell of lavender that still clung to Sarah's dresses. "I fed them too much?" Eliza asked. "Probably. Chickens are greedy." Caleb looked at the wooden box on the bed. "Thank you for what you said. You didn't have to be kind about Sarah. She was your wife and Katie's mother. She deserves kindness and respect." Eliza touched the doorframe lightly. "I meant what I said, though, about hoping she'd approve. I know I'm an intruder in her space. I don't take that lightly." "You're not an intruder, not anymore." Caleb met her eyes. "You're my wife. That means something, even in these circumstances. Sarah would understand that. She was practical about survival. She'd want Katie protected, the ranch maintained. He swallowed hard. She'd probably tell me to stop treating you like a guest and start treating you like a partner. A partner in survival. Is there any other kind?" Eliza smiled faintly. I suppose not. All right then, partner, let's go learn proper chicken feeding before Katie stages a rebellion. They walked out into the bright, cold morning together, and behind them Sarah's room stood quiet and peaceful, a shrine to love that was gone but not forgotten, making space for something new that was being built not from passion but from necessity, respect, and the fragile beginning of trust. The chicken lesson turned into an education in ranch management that stretched through the following weeks. Eliza approached learning the way she approached teaching, with methodical attention and a notebook she kept in her apron pocket, filled with observations about feeding schedules, weather patterns, and the peculiar personalities of livestock. Katie appointed herself instructor, explaining with grave authority which hens were broody, which rooster was mean, and why the water had to be changed twice daily even when it looked clean. "Because chickens are dirty," Katie announced, standing on an overturned bucket to reach the feeder. "They step in everything and then drink it. Papa says they'd poison themselves if we let them." "Your papa is right," Eliza made a note. "Though I suspect that applies to most animals, humans included." Katie giggled, an actual giggle, the first Caleb had heard since Sarah died, and the sound hit him square in the chest. He was mending harness in the barn doorway, watching them work together in the yard. And something about the scene made his throat tight, not because Eliza was replacing Sarah, because Katie was laughing again, and he'd forgotten what that sounded like. That evening, after Katie had gone to bed clutching her wooden horse and whispering goodnight to both adults instead of just her father, Eliza sat at the kitchen table with her notebook open, reviewing the day's observations. Caleb poured coffee and sat across from her, watching her write in neat, precise script. "You don't have to document everything," he said. "Most ranch work is just repetition and common sense." "Common sense is just documented observation that people forgot to write down." She didn't look up from her notes. "Besides, I learn better when I write things. Always have." "What else have you documented?" "The fence posts on the north boundary are rotting. The well pulley needs greasing. Your best milking cow favors her left rear leg, probably an old injury. The roof over Katie's room leaks when the wind comes from the west." She flipped a page. "Also, we're going through supplies faster than we can afford. I went through your account books. I hope you don't mind. The numbers don't work, Caleb. Even without the debt, you're spending more than you're bringing in." It was the first time she'd used his given name. He noticed and suspected she had too, from the faint color that rose in her cheeks, but she pressed on. "The cattle need to go to market soon, before the weather turns, and we need to negotiate better prices than you've been getting. You're being cheated." I know the prices aren't great, but they're robbery." She turned the account book to face him, pointing at entries. "You sold 17 head last year for $800. The market rate was at least $1,200, probably more. Who are you selling to?" "Gaines owns the stockyard. There's not another buyer within 2 days' ride." "Of course he does." Eliza's mouth tightened. "So he forgives your debt with one hand and steals from you with the other. He keeps you desperate just enough to maintain control, but not enough to lose the property entirely." She closed the book with a sharp snap. "We need to break his hold, find other buyers, even if it means a longer drive." "That takes time and money we don't have." "Then we make time. We find money." She looked at him with those clear brown eyes that had gone from guarded to fierce in the space of 3 weeks. "I didn't face down that man in our yard just to let him bleed us dry slowly. If we're going to survive this, Caleb, we need to fight smarter than he expects." Our yard. Our survival. The pronouns had shifted without either of them noticing exactly when, marking territory not of romance but of shared stake. This was her fight now as much as his, and she'd claimed it with the same determined practicality she brought to everything else. "What do you suggest?" "I suggest we go to Denver. Together. Take the cattle to the stockyards there. Negotiate directly with buyers who aren't in Gaines's pocket. It's a 4-day drive, maybe 5, but the prices will more than compensate." She hesitated. "And while we're there, I can visit the Territorial Records Office. See exactly what Gaines owns, what he's claimed, whether there are irregularities we can use." "That's assuming we can leave the ranch for that long, and Katie—" "Mrs. Henderson would take Katie. She offered when I saw her in town last week, said any time we needed help, she'd be happy to have Katie visit. Her own children are grown and she misses having young ones around." Eliza's expression softened. Katie likes her, and it would only be a week, perhaps less if we push hard. Caleb turned his coffee cup, thinking. The plan was risky but sound. Gaines would see them leaving as opportunity. Empty ranch, vulnerable property, but they couldn't survive by hiding either. At some point, they had to take initiative. All right, he said, we'll do it, but not until after the first frost. Cattle bring better prices when buyers know winter's coming and feed will cost more. Another 2 weeks, maybe 3. Agreed. That gives me time to prepare Katie, and for you to teach me enough about cattle handling that I'm useful on the drive instead of a burden. She stood, began clearing the coffee cups. I'll also write some letters. I know a lawyer in Kansas City from my teaching days. She helped write contracts for the school board. Maybe she can review Gaines's documents, tell us if there are weaknesses. A woman lawyer? Yes, Mr. Holloway. Women can be lawyers, shocking as that may seem. The tartness in her voice reminded him that Eliza's patience for condescension had limits. Abigail Crawford is one of the smartest people I've ever met, and she specializes in land contracts and fraud cases. If anyone can find holes in Gaines' schemes, she can. I wasn't questioning her abilities, just surprised. Perhaps you should be less surprised by what women can do. But her tone had lost some of its edge. I know the world you're used to, Caleb. Ranch wives who cook and clean and bear children and don't concern themselves with business. Sarah probably fit that mold. Sarah kept the books, made most of the financial decisions. She was smarter with money than I ever was. Caleb met her eyes. I'm not threatened by capable women, Eliza. I married one. The words hung between them, more intimate than he'd intended, because it was becoming true in ways neither had expected. They'd started as strangers bound by blackmail, but somewhere between chicken lessons and confronting Gaines and sitting at this table making plans, they'd become something else. Not lovers, not quite friends, but partners in the truest sense. Two people with different strengths working toward a common goal. Thank you, Eliza said quietly, for seeing that, for not expecting me to be decorative and silent. I need you two capable for that. This ranch requires every bit of intelligence we both have. He stood, moved toward the makeshift bed he'd arranged near the stove. Get some sleep. Morning comes early, and if you're serious about learning cattle work, tomorrow's going to be brutal. I'm always serious. That, Caleb was learning, was absolutely true. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Eliza learned to rope with competence, if not grace, to read cattle moods, to anticipate when a cow would bolt or when a steer would charge. She fell twice, got stepped on once, and came away with bruises she hid under long sleeves. But she never complained, never asked for easier work, and by the end of the second week she could help move the herd with enough skill that Caleb stopped worrying she'd get hurt. Katie watched these lessons with divided attention, half curious, half resentful that Eliza was learning things that had been Mama's domain. But she was also warming to Eliza in small ways, letting her braid her hair in the mornings, asking her to check arithmetic problems, sitting beside her at dinner instead of maintaining careful distance. It wasn't acceptance yet, but it was thaw. The letter from Abigail Crawford arrived on a cold morning that smelled like coming snow. Eliza read it twice at the breakfast table, her expression growing darker with each paragraph, before handing it to Caleb without a word. The lawyer's script was precise and damning. She'd reviewed the contract Eliza had copied and sent, and her assessment was brutal. The debt forgiveness was conditional on terms so vague they were essentially unenforceable, but proving that would require litigation neither Caleb nor Eliza could afford. Gaines had structured the agreement to look legal while maintaining maximum control through ambiguity. It was, Crawford wrote, a masterwork of predatory lending disguised as charity. But the letter continued with more interesting information. Crawford had contacts in Colorado territorial offices, and she'd made inquiries. Martin Gaines owned significant properties throughout the territory, most acquired through similar debt manipulations. Several families had filed complaints, though none had resulted in prosecution. Gaines was too well connected, too wealthy, too careful to cross obvious legal lines. However, there were rumors. Whispers that Gaines was overextended, that he'd borrowed heavily to finance his land acquisitions, that he was under pressure from Eastern investors to show returns. and that he was planning something large in Silver Ridge, possibly a railroad spur, possibly mining leases, definitely something that required consolidating property ownership. He's planning to force people out, Eliza said flatly. Buy up the whole valley while property is cheap, then profit when the railroad comes through, or when mining claims get developed. He's not just stealing from you, Caleb. He's stealing from everyone, systematically. Can we prove it? Not yet. But if we can document his methods, show a pattern of coercion and fraud across multiple families, then maybe Crawford can build a case. Maybe we can get the territorial governor involved, or the federal marshal. She tapped the letter. But first we need evidence, and we need to survive long enough to use it. Which brought them back to the Denver plan. Sell the cattle at fair prices, gather intelligence at the records office, buy time and breathing room to figure out how to fight a man who controlled most of Silver Ridge through debt and fear. When do we leave? Caleb asked. Tomorrow. Before Gaines realizes what we're planning. Eliza stood, already moving into action. I'll take Katie to Mrs. Henderson this afternoon. You finish preparing the herd. We leave at dawn. Together. Together. She paused, looked back. Caleb, if this goes wrong, if Gaines moves against us while we're gone, then we deal with it when we get back. But we can't live in fear, Eliza. That's what he wants. Keep us scared and compliant and slowly dying. He moved closer, close enough to see the worry in her eyes. Sarah used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding that something matters more than being afraid. This ranch, Katie's future, they matter more than Gaines's threats. Your wife was wise. She was, and she'd tell us to stop talking and start moving, so let's move. They spent the afternoon in controlled chaos. Eliza packed supplies while Caleb checked tack and prepared the herd. Katie sensed something important was happening and grew clingy, following Eliza from room to room with the wooden horse clutched tight. You're leaving, she said finally, voice small. Just for a week. Eliza knelt down. We have to sell the cattle in Denver so we can buy supplies for winter. Your papa needs my help. What if you don't come back? The fear in Katie's voice was real and deep. The fear of a child who'd already lost one mother and couldn't bear to lose another figure who'd started to matter. Eliza's expression softened in a way Caleb had rarely seen. I will come back, Katie. I promise. Cross my heart. She made the gesture solemnly. Mrs. Henderson is going to take wonderful care of you, and when we return, I'll bring you something special from the city. Deal? What kind of special? That's a surprise, but something you'll like. Eliza touched the wooden horse gently. Will you take care of the chickens while I'm gone? They trust you more than anyone. Katie considered this responsibility seriously. I can do that. I'm good with chickens. You're excellent with chickens, and with lots of other things. Eliza stood. Be brave for us, all right? The same way we're being brave for you. It was the right thing to say. Katie nodded, squaring her small shoulders, and went to pack her own bag for Mrs. Henderson's with the determination of someone entrusted with important duties. That evening, they drove Katie to the Henderson Ranch 3 miles east. Mrs. Henderson welcomed them with warmth and apple pie, asked no difficult questions, and promised to spoil Katie thoroughly. When they left, Katie stood on the porch, waving, brave and small against the darkening sky. She'll be fine, Eliza said as they rode home. But her voice was tight, and Caleb understood that leaving Katie, even temporarily, even safely, cost her more than she'd admit. She trusts you, he said. That's new. That's important. I hope I'm worthy of it. They prepared through the evening with the efficiency of people who'd learned to work together. By midnight, everything was ready. By dawn, they were moving the herd out under a sky still gray with pre-morning darkness. 2 riders and 17 head of cattle beginning the long push toward Denver. The first day was brutal. The cattle were fractious, unused to long drives, and the weather threatened rain that never quite arrived. Eliza proved her worth, anticipating problems before they developed, working her horse with increasing confidence. By evening, they'd covered 15 miles and camped beside a creek, too exhausted for anything but cold biscuits and coffee before collapsing into bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. The second day was worse. Rain came in sheets, turning the trail to mud that sucked at hooves and boots. One steer went lame and had to be coaxed along slowly. Another tried to bolt back toward home and had to be chased down and redirected. By nightfall, they were both soaked, filthy, and barely speaking, just functioning through shared exhaustion. But the third day dawned clear and cold, the mountains visible in sharp relief to the west, and something about the clean light and fresh air made everything feel possible again. They made better time, the herd settling into rhythm, and by evening had reached a way station where they could pen the cattle and sleep indoors for the first time since leaving. The station keeper was a widow named Agnes, who took one look at them and declared they needed food and baths in that order. She served stew that actually tasted like food instead of fuel, and afterwards showed Eliza to a bathing room while Caleb saw to the cattle. When he returned, Agnes cornered him with sharp eyes and sharper questions. "That your wife?" "Yes, ma'am." "New marriage, I'd wager. You both wear your rings like they're still strange." Caleb glanced at his hand, at the thin gold band he kept forgetting was there. "About a month." "Thought so. You move around each other like dancers learning new steps. Careful, uncertain, but trying hard." Agnes poured him coffee. "Advice, if you want it. That woman's got steel in her spine and fire in her belly. Don't waste that by treating her like porcelain. She'll resent you for it." "I've noticed the steel." "Good. Then you're smarter than most men." Agnes leaned against her counter. "Where are you headed?" "Denver. Selling cattle, avoiding a man who's trying to steal our ranch." "Martin Gaines?" Caleb's head snapped up. "You know him?" "Know of him. He tried to buy this way station 5 years back. When I refused, he made life difficult. Blocked my supply contracts, spread rumors I was running a brothel instead of a respectable business. I had to fight hard to keep my license." Her mouth was a grim line. "Man's a plague on this territory. You standing up to him?" "Trying to." "Then succeed. Do it for all of us who've had to bend or break under his schemes." She refilled his coffee. "Your wife comes out, you tell her Agnes Miller says she's got good instincts and to trust them. And you tell her there are more of us out here than she knows. Women who've had to fight men like Gaines just to exist. She's not alone." When Eliza emerged, pink-cheeked from the bath and wearing a clean dress Agnes had lent her, Caleb passed along the message. Eliza's eyes went bright and suspiciously wet. "Thank you," she told Agnes, "for everything. Just survive, honey, and when you take Gaines down, notice I said when, not if, you let me know. I'll throw a party." They left at dawn with full bellies and lighter hearts, Agnes's words carrying them toward Denver like a favorable wind. The final day's drive passed smoothly, and by late afternoon they were moving through Denver's outskirts, 17 weary cattle and 2 wearier riders, entering a city that felt vast and overwhelming after weeks of ranch isolation. The stockyard sprawled at the city's edge, a maze of pens and chutes, and men in work clothes evaluating livestock with critical eyes. Caleb found a buyer while Eliza stayed with the herd, and within an hour they were negotiating. The buyer, a blunt-faced man named Morrison, inspected the cattle with thorough professionalism. "Good stock, healthy. I can offer $1,200. $1,500, Eliza said, appearing at Caleb's elbow. Morrison raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" "His wife and business partner. These cattle were grass-fed on clean range. They're young and prime, and we both know the winter shortage means you'll get $1,800 minimum when you resell. Don't insult us with lowball offers." Morrison looked between them, clearly recalculating. $1,350. $1,475, and you provide certificates of sale we can register with the territorial office. We need documentation that can't be disputed. Why would... Morrison stopped, understanding crossing his face. "You're fighting someone local." "We're protecting our interests," Eliza said evenly. "Do we have a deal?" Morrison studied her for a long moment, then grinned. "I like you. $1,475 it is. And I'll throw in a letter of reference if you ever need to prove these cattle came from honest stock and honest dealing." They shook on it, first Morrison and Caleb, then Morrison and Eliza, which seemed to surprise the buyer but not displease him. By evening they had cash and documents secured in Caleb's saddlebags and found a modest hotel where they took separate rooms and slept like the dead. The next morning, leaving the horses stabled and rested, they walked to the Territorial Records Office, an imposing brick building that smelled of paper and bureaucracy. Inside, Eliza transformed. Gone was the ranch wife in borrowed clothes. In her place stood someone who spoke the language of clerks and contracts, who knew which forms to request and which questions to ask. She spent 4 hours going through property records while Caleb waited, watching her work with growing respect. She took notes in her precise script, cross-referenced documents, asked for clarifications that revealed patterns only someone looking carefully would notice. When she finally emerged, her expression was grim triumph. "I have him," she said quietly. "Not enough to convict, but enough to question. Gaines has claimed mineral rights on properties he doesn't own outright, including yours. He's filed papers suggesting he holds full title when he only holds liens. And he's done it systematically across 40 properties in 3 counties. What does that mean? It means he's committing fraud. If the territorial surveyor investigates, if someone files an official complaint, Gaines could lose everything. His properties, his business licenses, possibly face criminal charges." She gripped her notes tightly. "We have grounds, Caleb, real grounds. We just need courage to use them." "Then we use them." He took her hand the first time he'd done so since their wedding and felt her fingers close around his. "Whatever it takes, we use them. Together." They filed a formal complaint that afternoon, detailing irregularities and requesting investigation. The clerk accepted it with bureaucratic disinterest, but Eliza had copies made and notarized, sent one to Abigail Crawford in Kansas City, and kept 2 more for their own records. "Gaines will find out," Caleb said as they left the building. "This will make him dangerous." He was already dangerous. Now we're dangerous too. Eliza looked up at the Denver sky, clear and blue and infinite. "Let him come. We'll be ready." They started the ride home the next morning, lighter by 17 cattle, but heavier with purpose. The journey back passed in easier silence, the kind that comes when people have worked hard together and found their rhythm. They talked more, about strategy, about the ranch, about careful plans for spring if they survived the winter. Eliza shared stories about teaching, about students who'd struggled and triumphed. Caleb talked about Sarah, about the life they'd built, and found it hurt less to remember when someone listened without judgment. On their last night before reaching home, camped under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, Eliza spoke into the darkness. "Thank you for treating me like an equal in this, for trusting my instincts." "Thank you for having instincts worth trusting." Caleb stared at the fire. "This wasn't what either of us wanted, Eliza. But I'm grateful you're the one I'm fighting beside. Even though I'm the dried-up spinster the town pitied? Especially because you're the woman who stood on my porch and told Martin Gaines to go to hell." He smiled into the darkness. "You're fierce, Eliza. That matters more than any foolish thing small minds say." She was quiet for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then very softly, "You're a good man, Caleb Holloway. Better than circumstances required. I'm grateful for that." They reached the ranch at midday to find everything intact, the house locked, no signs of interference. Mrs. Henderson brought Katie home that evening, and the little girl launched herself at Eliza with a force that nearly knocked them both down. "You came back! You promised, and you came back!" "Of course I came back." Eliza held her tight, and over Katie's head her eyes met Caleb's with something that looked like wonder. "This is home. Where else would I go?" That night, after Katie was asleep clutching the music box they'd brought from Denver, Caleb and Eliza sat at the kitchen table reviewing their documents and plans. They had money now. They had evidence. They had each other's backs. But they both knew the real fight was just beginning. Gaines would receive notice of the complaint within days, and his response would be swift and possibly brutal. They'd thrown down a challenge to the most powerful man in the territory. "No going back now," Caleb said. "Was there ever?" Eliza met his eyes steadily. "We were always going to fight. We just needed to be ready. And now we are." Outside, the Colorado night pressed close around the ranch house, cold and vast and full of unknown dangers. But inside, 3 people who'd been strangers were becoming family, and they were done being victims of other people's greed. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The retaliation came faster than expected, arriving 3 days after their return in the form of Sheriff Wade Tucker and 2 deputized men Caleb recognized from Gaines's employ. They rode up at noon while Eliza was teaching Katie arithmetic at the kitchen table, and Caleb was splitting wood for winter. Mr. Holloway. Tucker dismounted with the careful neutrality of a lawman caught between duty and politics. I need to speak with you about a complaint filed in Denver. Caleb set down the axe, aware of Eliza appearing in the doorway with Katie behind her skirts. What kind of complaint? Mr. Gaines alleges you've filed fraudulent claims against his property holdings. Says you're attempting to defame his business and damage his reputation through false accusations to territorial authorities. Tucker pulled papers from his coat. He's demanding retraction and requesting I investigate whether criminal charges are warranted for filing false reports. Those reports aren't false. Eliza stepped off the porch, her voice carrying clear across the yard. Every claim is documented and notarized. If Mr. Gaines disputes the accuracy, he's welcome to present evidence to the Territorial Surveyor's Office. That's the proper venue for such disputes, not a sheriff 3 counties away from Denver jurisdiction. Tucker's eyebrows rose. Mrs. Holloway, this is a legal matter. Then treat it legally, Sheriff. My husband and I filed a legitimate complaint with appropriate authorities after discovering irregularities in property records. If Mr. Gaines believes he's been slandered, his recourse is civil court, not intimidation through law enforcement. She crossed her arms. Unless, of course, he's hoping to frighten us into withdrawing the complaint before it receives proper investigation, which would suggest the accusations have merit. One of the deputies shifted uncomfortably. Tucker's jaw tightened, but there was something like respect in his eyes. Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. Gaines filed a complaint. I'm required to investigate. Then investigate properly. Eliza disappeared into the house, returned with documents. Here, copies of everything we filed, along with notarized certifications from the Territorial Records Office. Review them. If you find anything fraudulent, arrest us. If you don't, tell Mr. Gaines that harassment through proxy won't work any better than his other tactics. Tucker took the papers, scanned them with attention that suggested he actually knew how to read legal documents. His expression shifted from dutiful neutrality to troubled interest as he worked through the pages. These are survey discrepancies, he said slowly. Mineral rights claimed on properties without clear title. That's serious, if true. It's true. Caleb moved to stand beside Eliza, presenting unified front. We have witnesses, records, independent verification. Gaines has been filing false claims for years. We're just the first ones to formally challenge him. Why? Tucker looked between them. Why risk this? Gaines owns half the territory. He could crush you. He already tried, Eliza said quietly. He forced us into a marriage neither of us wanted, threatened our home and livelihood, and he's doing the same to dozens of other families. Someone had to stand up. We chose to be those someones. Tucker was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents, studying them. Finally, he folded the papers and handed them back. I can't find evidence of fraud in your filing. The complaints appear legitimate and properly documented. He looked at his deputies. We're done here. Mount up. But Gaines said, one deputy started. I don't care what Gaines said. My job is enforcing law, not doing his dirty work. Tucker turned back to Caleb and Eliza. But I'll tell you straight, this won't stop him. He'll come at you another way. Legal, illegal, whatever works. Gaines doesn't lose gracefully. Neither do we, Caleb said. Tucker almost smiled. I'm starting to see that. Be careful, both of you, and lock your doors at night. They rode off, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Eliza sagged slightly, the steel that had kept her spine straight, suddenly requiring effort to maintain. Caleb caught her elbow. You all right? I'm terrified, she admitted, but I'll be damned if I let Gaines see it. Katie emerged from the house, wooden horse clutched tight, her face pale. Are the bad men going to take Papa away? No, sweetheart. Eliza knelt down, pulled Katie close. We're safe. The sheriff was just doing his job. He looked at our papers and agreed we did nothing wrong. But Mr. Gaines is still bad. Yes. But we're ready for him now. Eliza stroked Katie's hair. Remember what I told you about being brave? Sometimes being brave means standing up to powerful people, even when you're scared. That's what your papa and I are doing. Like in the stories, where the knight fights the dragon? Exactly like that. Except we're both knights and we're fighting together. Katie considered this, then nodded with child logic certainty. Then you'll win. In stories, the knights always win. If only real life worked like stories, Caleb thought. But he said nothing, just squeezed Eliza's shoulder in silent support before returning to his wood splitting with more force than necessary. That night, after Katie was asleep, they sat at the kitchen table making plans with the urgency of people who knew time was running short. Eliza had spread out all their documents, creating a map of Gaines's holdings and manipulations that covered half the table. "He'll escalate," she said, marking another property on her hand-drawn chart. "Tucker's visit was warning shot. Next will be something more direct." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking he'll try to prove the marriage is invalid, claim it was coerced, which it was, and use that to reinstate your debt." She tapped her pen against the paper. "Or he'll manufacture some violation of the conditional terms. Claim you abandoned the property during the Denver trip, or that we're not truly residing here as husband and wife." The last phrase hung awkward between them. They'd maintained separate sleeping arrangements, careful distance, the pretense that this was business arrangement rather than real marriage. But Gaines could use that, could claim the marriage was fraud, unconsummated, grounds for annulment. "We could," Caleb started, then stopped, unsure how to finish. "We could make it real," Eliza said quietly. "Remove that weapon from his arsenal. But Caleb, I can't." She stared at her hands. "That wasn't part of our agreement. You married me to save your ranch, not to. I won't trap you into something neither of us wants." "Is that what you think? That being truly married to you would be a trap?" "Isn't it?" She met his eyes. "We're partners in survival, allies against a common enemy. That's all this was supposed to be. Pretending it's more just because Gaines forces our hand seems like another way of letting him control us." She was right and wrong, because somewhere in the past 6 weeks, something had shifted. The careful distance had become comfortable companionship. The forced partnership had evolved into genuine respect. And if Caleb was honest with himself, the beginnings of something that might eventually become affection. He didn't love Eliza, not the way he'd loved Sarah with that young, passionate certainty, but he trusted her, relied on her. Found himself thinking about her smile when she successfully roped a steer, her fierce defense of Katie, the way she fit into his life like a piece he hadn't known was missing. "What if it's not pretending?" he said carefully. "What if we're already becoming something real, and we're just too stubborn to admit it?" Eliza's pen stilled. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we work well together, we respect each other. Katie's happier than she's been in 2 years. And when I think about the future, about keeping this ranch, building something stable, you're in those thoughts. Not as an obligation, Eliza. As a partner I want beside me." "That's not love." "No. But it might become love, given time and choice. And right now I'd rather have a real marriage built on respect and partnership than a fake one built on coercion." He reached across the table, covered her hand with his. "I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking if you're willing to truly be my wife, to build something genuine instead of just surviving in proximity." She looked at their joined hands, at his calloused fingers against her ink-stained ones, and he could see her thinking through implications and risks and possibilities. "I don't know how to be a wife," she finally said. "I spent my whole life expecting to be alone, teaching myself not to want things I couldn't have. And now you're offering something I didn't dare imagine, and I don't know if I'm brave enough to take it. You faced down Gaines in front of witnesses. You filed complaints against the most powerful man in the territory. You learned ranch work in weeks when most people take years." Caleb squeezed her hand gently. "You're the bravest person I know, Eliza. If you can do all that, you can take a chance on this marriage becoming real. And if it doesn't work, if we try and fail and end up resenting each other, then at least we tried on our own terms instead of Gaines's." He stood, still holding her hand, and drew her up beside him. "We don't have to decide everything tonight. Just think about it, about whether this could be more than survival." She nodded slowly, her brown eyes uncertain and hopeful and scared in equal measure. "I'll think about it. But Caleb, if we do this, if we make this real, I need you to know I won't be a decorative wife. I'll keep teaching Katie, keep managing the books, keep fighting Gaines. I won't shrink into some quiet domestic role just because we're sharing more than a roof. I wouldn't want you to. He realized he was still holding her hand, realized she hadn't pulled away. I married a fierce woman who speaks her mind and takes no prisoners. I'm not looking to change that. Good. She squeezed his fingers once, then released them and turned back to her documents. Because we still need to figure out how to protect ourselves from whatever Gaines tries next, and that requires my mind sharp and focused, not distracted by other things. But there was color in her cheeks and a softness around her mouth that suggested she wasn't entirely opposed to being distracted. Caleb filed that observation away and returned to planning, though his mind kept drifting to possibilities he'd thought were closed to him after Sarah died. The next blow came 2 weeks later, delivered not by Gaines himself, but by the Silver Ridge School Board. Eliza received the letter while collecting mail in town, read it standing in the middle of the general store, and went so pale that Mrs. Chen behind the counter hurried around to check if she was ill. "I'm fine," Eliza managed, "just surprised." She waited until they were home to show Caleb the letter. It was brief and professionally cruel, informing Mrs. Eliza Holloway that her teaching position had been terminated effective immediately due to failure to maintain professional standards expected of educators in our community. The school board thanked her for her service and wished her well in future endeavors. "Gaines chairs the school board," Eliza said flatly. "This is him, removing the one thing I had that was mine. Can he do this? Just fire you without cause?" "He didn't fire me without cause. He fired me for moral turpitude, the implication being that my forced marriage proves I'm somehow unfit to teach children." She crumpled the letter. "It's legal enough that fighting it would require lawyers I can't afford and time I don't have. He's boxed me in perfectly." Katie, who'd been playing with her wooden horse, looked up with worry. "Does this mean you can't teach me anymore?" "No, sweetheart. I'll always teach you, but I won't be teaching at the schoolhouse." Eliza's voice wavered slightly. "I'm sorry. I know you liked going there, seeing the other children. I like learning with you better anyway." Katie came over, pressed against Eliza's side in the fierce hug of a child offering comfort. "You're a good teacher even without the schoolhouse." Eliza pulled Katie close, and over the child's head her eyes met Caleb's. They were bright with unshed tears and banked fury. "He keeps taking things," she said quietly. "Piece by piece, he dismantles everything until there's nothing left to stand on. Then we take something from him." Caleb stood, decision crystallizing. "We can't just defend anymore, Eliza. We need to attack." "With what weapons? He has money, connections, the law on his side. He has secrets. Lies he's told, frauds he's committed, families he's destroyed." Caleb pulled out the chair beside her. "We document everything. Every family he's hurt, every debt he's manipulated, every property he's stolen. We build a case so overwhelming that when the territorial surveyor investigates, they can't ignore it. And we do it fast before he can cover his tracks. That means talking to people, convincing them to speak against him. Most are too scared. Then we start with the ones who aren't scared anymore, the ones who've already lost everything." Caleb thought of Agnes at the way station, of Sheriff Tucker's troubled expression, of the whispers he'd heard over years about Gaines's methods. "There are more of us than he wants to believe. We just need to find each other." Eliza wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, straightened her shoulders. "All right, we gather evidence, but we do it carefully. Gaines is watching us now, waiting for mistakes. Let him watch." Caleb stood, offered his hand. "We've got nothing to hide and everything to fight for." She took his hand, let him pull her to her feet, and for a moment they stood close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, could smell the lavender soap she used. Close enough that kissing her would be simple, natural, the logical next step in whatever they were becoming. But Katie was watching, and the moment wasn't right, and they both knew it. So instead they stepped apart and returned to planning, though something had shifted again between them, some invisible boundary crossed. The evidence gathering took 3 weeks of careful, exhausting work. They visited neighboring ranches, spoke to shopkeepers in town, tracked down families who'd left the territory under Gaines's pressure. Some refused to talk, too frightened of retribution. But others, those who'd already lost everything, spoke freely, pouring out stories of manipulated contracts, false promises, debts that multiplied impossibly until properties were seized. Eliza documented everything in her precise script, cross-referencing names and dates, building a narrative of systematic predation that spanned 5 years and 47 families. She worked late into the nights, hunched over the kitchen table by lamplight, while Caleb kept watch and Katie slept, creating a case file that would have impressed any lawyer. Caleb, meanwhile, reached out to contacts beyond Silver Ridge, ranchers he'd known before Sarah died, merchants from Denver, even a journalist from the Rocky Mountain News who'd written about land fraud in other territories. Each conversation added weight to their case, created witnesses outside Gaines's sphere of influence. But the work was dangerous. They were followed in town. Strange riders appeared on their property boundary, watching but not approaching. Twice they found fence posts cut in the night, cattle scattered, subtle harassment designed to wear them down without crossing into overt violence that might attract official attention. And through it all, Katie watched and learned. She learned that standing up to bullies meant being afraid but acting anyway. That adults didn't always have answers but could find courage in partnership. That family wasn't just blood but choice and commitment. One evening, as Eliza was tucking her in, Katie asked the question that had been building. "Are you and Papa going to stay married, even after Mr. Gaines is gone?" Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. "Would you want us to?" "I think so." Katie hugged her wooden horse. "At first I didn't want you here. I wanted Mama back. But Mama can't come back, and you're good. You teach me things, and you help Papa, and you make him smile again sometimes. I think Mama would like that." "You do?" "Mama always said Papa needed someone to argue with him because he got stubborn when he was alone. She said it like a joke, but I think she meant it." Katie looked up with those serious eyes. "You argue with him, but in a good way, like you both care about being right for the right reasons." It was startlingly perceptive for a 6-year-old, and Eliza felt her throat tighten. "Your mama sounds like she was very wise." "She was, and she loved Papa a lot. But she's gone, and you're here, and I think—" Katie paused, struggling for words. "I think maybe Papa could love you too, if you let him. And maybe you could love him back. Would that be okay?" "Katie, it's complicated." "Is it?" Katie tilted her head. "You smile when he comes in. He watches you when you're teaching me. You hold hands sometimes when you think I'm not looking. That's what people who like each other do." Had they been that obvious? Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We're partners. Friends, maybe. But love takes time, sweetheart. It doesn't just happen because people are married." "Mama said love is choosing to see the good in someone even when things are hard. You and Papa do that." Katie yawned, settling deeper into her pillow. "I think you're already a little bit in love. You just don't know it yet." She drifted off before Eliza could formulate a response, leaving her sitting in the dim room with a sleeping child and thoughts that wouldn't settle. Was Katie right? Had she somehow fallen for Caleb without noticing? Not dramatic sweeping passion, but something quieter and more durable? Partnership that had evolved into affection that was becoming something deeper? She didn't know. But as she left Katie's room and found Caleb waiting in the kitchen with coffee and worried eyes, asking if everything was all right, she realized that the thought of leaving, of this arrangement ending and returning to independence, filled her with something that felt like loss. "Everything's fine," she said, accepting the coffee. "Katie just had questions about the future." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggests she's more observant than we give her credit for." Eliza met his eyes over the rim of her cup. "She asked if we're going to stay married after Gaines is dealt with." "What did you tell her?" "I didn't know what to tell her." Eliza set down the cup. "Because I don't know the answer anymore, Caleb. When we started this, I thought I knew exactly what it was. A business arrangement, a survival strategy. But now," she gestured helplessly, "now I don't know what we are." Caleb was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table and took her hand. "I think we're two people who started out trapped and are becoming partners who choose to stay. I think we respect each other, trust each other, care about each other's well-being. And I think if we survive this fight with Gaines, we might discover we've built something worth keeping." "That's not an answer." "Because there isn't one yet, just possibility." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "But Eliza, for what it's worth, I'd like to find out what we could become if we gave ourselves the chance." She looked at their joined hands, at the calluses they'd both earned working side by side, at the matching rings they'd worn for 2 months that were starting to feel less like shackles and more like promises. "All right," she said softly. "When this is over, when we've beaten Gaines and secured our safety, let's find out. It's a deal." They sat together in the warm kitchen, hands linked across the table, and somewhere in the darkness outside, Martin Gaines was plotting their destruction, unaware that the forced marriage he'd orchestrated had become the very thing that might defeat him, two stubborn people who'd found strength in each other and refused to break. The final confrontation announced itself 3 days later when a rider came at dawn carrying an official summons. Caleb was required to appear before the Territorial Land Claims Court in Denver within 10 days to defend his property rights against a formal challenge filed by Martin Gaines, who claimed prior mineral rights and alleged that Caleb had filed fraudulent homestead papers. "He's going for everything," Eliza said, reading over his shoulder. "Not just the debt, not just harassment. He wants the land itself declared forfeit. Can he do that? If he proves fraud in the original homestead filing, yes. The property reverts to territorial control and goes to auction, where Gaines, conveniently, will be the highest bidder." She set down the summons. "This is endgame, Caleb. He's tired of playing. He's going to take everything and bury us legally so we can't fight back." "Then we don't fight back. We fight forward." Caleb grabbed his coat. "We're going to Denver, today. And we're bringing every piece of evidence we've gathered, every witness we've found, and we're going to burn his empire down in front of the territorial judge." "That's insane. We have 10 days, which gives him 10 days to manufacture evidence, intimidate witnesses, bribe officials. We go now, file our counterclaim, and force him to defend himself instead of attacking us." Caleb's jaw was set with the determination she'd come to recognize. "He thinks we'll scramble and panic. Let's prove him wrong." Eliza stared at him for a moment, then started laughing, high and slightly wild, the sound of someone who'd been backed into so many corners that forward was the only direction left. "All right, let's do it. Let's take the fight to him." She grabbed her coat. "I'll pack the documents. You saddle the horses. Katie goes to Mrs. Henderson again." "No." Katie stood in her nightgown in the doorway, wooden horse in hand. "I want to come. I want to see you beat the bad man." "Katie, this isn't safe," Caleb started. "I know. But you said family protects each other. We're family now." She lifted her chin in stubborn mimicry of both her adults. "I want to be there when you win." Caleb looked at Eliza. She looked back. And in that silent exchange, they acknowledged what Katie's words meant. Not just that she'd accepted their marriage, but that she'd claimed them both as hers. They were family now, forged by adversity and choice. And families stood together. "All right," Eliza said. Eliza nuzzed. "Pack warm clothes. It's a long ride, and Denver's cold in November." They rode out 2 hours later with documents, determination, and a 6-year-old girl who believed in knights and dragons and the certainty that good would triumph. Behind them, the ranch stood empty but not abandoned, a promise they'd return or die trying. And ahead, in Denver, Martin Gaines was about to learn that some people, when pushed far enough, don't break. They become dangerous. The ride to Denver took 4 days of pushing harder than was wise, but they arrived ahead of Gaines's expected timeline, and that was worth the exhaustion. Katie rode in front of Caleb, bundled in blankets and dozing against his chest, while Eliza kept pace beside them, her face set with the determined focus of someone preparing for battle. They stabled the horses at the same livery they'd used before, and the owner recognized them with a nod that suggested approval. Word traveled in strange ways. Apparently the rancher and his schoolteacher wife, who'd challenged Gaines's pricing, had made an impression. "Heard you filed complaints against Gaines," the stableman said as he took their reins. "Brave or foolish, can't decide which." "Maybe both," Caleb said, lifting Katie down. She was awake now, looking around Denver with wide eyes that held more awareness than a 6-year-old should need. "He's here too, arrived yesterday with lawyers from back east. Fancy men in fancy suits." The stableman spat tobacco. "They're staying at the Windsor Hotel, throwing money around like water, making sure everyone knows they're important." "Then we'd better remind them that justice doesn't care about importance," Eliza said quietly. They found modest lodging, 2 rooms this time, one for Katie and Eliza, one for Caleb, and spent that evening organizing their evidence into something coherent enough to present to a territorial judge. Eliza had created an index, cross-referenced by date and property, with witness statements attached to each claim. It was professional work, the kind that would have impressed any law office. "Where did you learn to do this?" Caleb asked, watching her lay out documents with practiced precision. "I told you I had a lawyer friend. Abigail taught me basics of legal research when I was writing teacher contracts. Said every woman should understand how to defend herself in writing since courts rarely let us defend ourselves in person." Eliza aligned another stack of papers. "I never thought I'd need it like this, but I'm grateful I paid attention." Katie was curled up on the bed, wooden horse beside her, watching them work with the gravity of a child who understood that tomorrow mattered. "Will the judge be fair?" she asked. "We'll make him be fair," Eliza said. "That's what evidence does. It forces people to see truth even when they'd rather not." "What if Mr. Gaines lies?" "Then we prove he's lying." Caleb came to sit beside his daughter. "Katie girl, I need you to understand something. Tomorrow might be hard. Mr. Gaines might say bad things about us, might try to make us look like we're wrong, but we know the truth, and we have proof. Can you be brave for us tomorrow? Can you sit quiet and trust that your mama, that Eliza and I will handle it?" He'd almost said your mama without thinking, and from the way Eliza's hands stilled on the papers, she'd noticed. Katie noticed too, looking between them with that considering expression children get when they're processing something important. "She's not my mama," Katie said slowly. "But she could be like a mama, if that's okay." "It's more than okay," Caleb said, his throat tight. "If that's what you want." Katie looked at Eliza. "Is it what you want?" Eliza set down the papers and came to kneel beside the bed, taking Katie's small hands in her ink-stained ones. "I would be honored to be your mother, Katie. Not to replace the mama who loved you first, but to love you second. If you'll let me. And you'll stay? Even after Mr. Gaines is gone and we don't have to be married anymore?" "I'll stay," Eliza said, and her voice was steady despite the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "Because somewhere between chicken lessons and fighting bad men, your family became my family, and I don't want to leave." Katie considered this with the seriousness of someone making a binding decision, then nodded once. "Okay, then you can be my second mama, but I still get to remember my first mama." "Always," Eliza promised. "We'll remember her together." Katie hugged her then, fierce and quick, before pulling back and returning her attention to the wooden horse. But something had been settled, some last piece of family clicking into place. When Caleb caught Eliza's eye over Katie's head, the look that passed between them held promises that went far beyond the courtroom fight ahead. They rose before dawn, dressed in their best clothes, Caleb's brushed suit that still smelled faintly of mothballs, Eliza's most severe dress with her hair pulled back in the unforgiving style she'd worn when they first met. War paint, she'd called it wryly. Armor made of respectability. The territorial courthouse was an imposing brick building that seemed designed to make petitioners feel small. They arrived early, but Gaines was already there with his contingent of lawyers. 3 men in expensive suits who looked at Caleb and Eliza with the casual disdain of people who knew they held every advantage. Gaines himself stood near the courtroom entrance, and when he saw them, his smile was sharp and satisfied. "Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, how domestic you look, dragging your child to witness her father's humiliation." His gaze slid to Katie. "Don't worry, little one. I'll make sure you're cared for after your father loses his property. Perhaps a nice boarding school back east, away from all this unpleasantness." "Don't speak to my daughter," Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Your daughter?" Gaines's eyebrows rose. "I understood she was your late wife's daughter. This new wife of yours has no legal claim to the child. When you lose the ranch, and you will lose it, custody becomes an interesting question, doesn't it?" Eliza's hand found Caleb's, squeezed hard in warning before he could do something stupid like punch Gaines in front of witnesses. "The only interesting question," she said clearly, "is how you'll explain 47 counts of property fraud to Territorial Judge Morrison. I believe he has very firm opinions about men who abuse their positions of trust." Gaines's smile faltered slightly. "You have no proof of anything except your own desperation. Don't I?" Eliza opened her satchel, pulled out the indexed documentation. I have witness statements, notarized documents, property records that show a clear pattern of fraudulent mineral claims on properties you don't fully own. I have testimony from families you've destroyed, from merchants you've cheated, from officials you've attempted to bribe. Shall I continue, or would you like to withdraw your challenge and settle this quietly? For the first time since Caleb had known him, Martin Gaines looked uncertain. His lawyers were conferring in urgent whispers, clearly not expecting this level of preparation from a desperate rancher and his schoolteacher wife. The judge will throw out your fabrications, Gaines said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Then let's find out, Eliza said, and walked past him into the courtroom with her head high and Katie's hand in hers. The courtroom was paneled in dark wood that absorbed sound and made everything feel weighted with importance. Judge Morrison presided from his bench with the weathered face of someone who'd seen every kind of deception and retained the capacity for both mercy and harshness, depending on what justice required. Gaines's lawyers presented first, laying out allegations of fraudulent homestead filing, claiming that Caleb had misrepresented his property boundaries and failed to disclose prior mineral claims. They had documents that looked official, testimony from a surveyor Caleb didn't recognize, and arguments delivered with the polished confidence of men who did this professionally. When they finished, Judge Morrison looked at Caleb with neutral eyes. Mr. Holloway, how do you respond to these charges? Caleb stood, aware of Eliza beside him radiating fierce support, aware of Katie watching with absolute faith that right would prevail. Your Honor, every claim made against me is false. My homestead filing was legitimate. My property boundaries were surveyed and recorded properly, and there were no prior mineral claims on the land when I filed. Mr. Gaines is attempting to steal my property through legal manipulation because I challenged his business practices. That's a serious accusation, Morrison said. I have serious evidence. Caleb gestured to Eliza, who stood and approached the bench with their documentation. Your Honor, my name is Eliza Holloway. I'm Mr. Holloway's wife and a former schoolteacher with expertise in legal documentation. What we're presenting is a comprehensive analysis of Mr. Gaines' property dealings over the past 5 years, showing a clear pattern of fraud, manipulation, and coercion. She handed up the indexed files. You'll find witness statements from 47 families who've been victimized by similar tactics, property records showing false mineral claims, testimony from merchants regarding price manipulation and monopolistic practices, and evidence that Mr. Gaines has been using his position as head of the Silver Ridge Land Company to systematically acquire properties through fraudulent debt manipulation. Morrison began reading, his expression growing darker with each page. Gaines's lawyers were on their feet immediately, objecting to the relevance, the sourcing, the admissibility. But Morrison waved them silent. I'll review the evidence and determine relevance myself, counselors. Sit down. The reading took 20 minutes. The courtroom stayed silent except for the rustle of papers and Morrison's occasional grunt of interest or displeasure. Katie sat perfectly still beside Caleb, wooden horse in her lap, watching the judge with the intensity of someone willing him to see truth. Finally, Morrison set down the documents and looked at Gaines. Mr. Gaines, I'm seeing allegations here of systematic fraud. Multiple families claiming you manipulated them into unfavorable contracts through false promises and manufactured debt. Property records that suggest you've claimed mineral rights on lands you don't own. This goes far beyond a simple boundary dispute. Those are lies manufactured by disgruntled debtors, Gaines said, but his usual smooth confidence was cracking. People who refuse to honor their legitimate obligations and are now attempting to defame me rather than accept responsibility. 47 families, all lying in coordinated fashion? Morrison's skepticism was evident. That seems unlikely, Mr. Gaines. Your Honor, if I may. One of Gaines's lawyers stood, smooth as oil. These allegations are prejudicial and irrelevant to the matter at hand. We're here to adjudicate a property boundary dispute, not to retry Mr. Gaines's entire business history. The evidence regarding Mr. Holloway's homestead filing is clear. Actually, Counselor, it's not clear at all. Morrison flipped through papers. Your surveyor's report contradicts the original homestead survey from 3 years ago. That's concerning. And these mineral claims you say Mr. Holloway failed to disclose. According to the Territorial Records Office, Those claims were filed by Mr. Gaines himself just 6 weeks ago, after Mr. Holloway filed his complaint challenging other Gaines properties. The courtroom went very quiet. Your Honor, I can explain, Gaines started. I'd like to hear that explanation, Morrison said coldly, because from where I'm sitting, it appears you filed fraudulent mineral claims specifically to create grounds for seizing Mr. Holloway's property. That's not just civil fraud, Mr. Gaines. That's criminal. Gaines's face had gone pale. His lawyers were conferring in urgent, angry whispers, and Caleb felt something like hope unfurl in his chest for the first time in months. Furthermore, Morrison continued, I'm troubled by the pattern Mrs. Holloway has documented. This court exists to protect property rights, not to facilitate theft through legal manipulation. I'm going to order a full territorial investigation into all of Mr. Gaines's property acquisitions in the past 5 years. And Mr. Gaines, you're going to explain to the territorial marshal why you filed mineral claims on property you don't own while simultaneously challenging that property's ownership. This is outrageous. Gaines was on his feet. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent before you make this worse for yourself. Morrison's gavel came down hard. This case is dismissed. Mr. Holloway's property rights are confirmed. And Mr. Gaines, you're to surrender all documents related to your land company operations to the marshal's office within 48 hours. If you attempt to leave the territory before this investigation concludes, I'll have you arrested for flight from prosecution. The gavel came down again, final and decisive. And just like that, it was over. Caleb stood frozen, unable to quite process what had happened. Beside him, Eliza had one hand pressed to her mouth, eyes bright with unshed tears. And Katie launched herself at both of them with a shriek of triumph that shattered the courtroom's dignity. You won! You beat the dragon! They had. Against impossible odds, with nothing but truth and determination, and Eliza's meticulous documentation, they'd actually won. Gaines was being surrounded by his lawyers, all of them arguing in furious whispers. The territorial marshal was already approaching to take custody of documents, and Judge Morrison was watching Caleb and Eliza with something that looked like approval. Mr. Holloway, Mrs. Holloway, approach the bench. They did, Katie between them holding both their hands. Morrison looked at them with weathered eyes that had seen too many families destroyed by men like Gaines. What you did here took courage, he said quietly. Most people don't fight back. They take the loss and move on because fighting seems impossible. You proved it's not impossible. You saved your property and probably saved dozens of other families in the process. My wife did that, Your Honor, Caleb said, squeezing Eliza's hand. I would have given up without her. Then you married well. Morrison's mouth quirked. Mrs. Holloway, you have a gift for legal research. If you ever tire of ranching, several law firms in Denver would be fortunate to have you. Thank you, Your Honor, but I think I'll stick with ranching. Eliza's voice was steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. It turns out I'm quite good at it. They left the courthouse to find Agnes from the way station waiting outside with a wide smile and congratulations. Word had traveled fast. Apparently half the territory had been watching this case, waiting to see if someone could finally stand up to Gaines and win. I told you to succeed, Agnes said, pulling Eliza into a hug. And you did. You magnificent, stubborn woman. You actually did it. We did it, Eliza corrected, gesturing to Caleb. Both of us. All three of us, Katie piped up. I was brave and quiet, like they asked. You were perfect, Caleb said, lifting his daughter onto his shoulders. She was getting too big for it, really, but today was a day for celebrating impossibilities. They stayed in Denver 2 more days while the marshal's investigation began unfolding. Turned out that once one person breaks, others follow. Families who'd been too frightened to speak before came forward with their own stories. Merchants revealed price manipulations. Even some of Gaines's own employees turned witness when they realized the empire was crumbling. By the time Caleb and Eliza prepared to leave, Gaines had been arrested on 14 counts of fraud and was facing years in prison. His properties were being seized, his contracts reviewed, his entire operation dismantled piece by piece. I almost feel sorry for him, Eliza said as they saddled their horses for the journey home. Almost. He destroyed lives for profit. He terrorized families, stole homes, used the law as a weapon against the innocent. She tightened the cinch with more force than necessary. Whatever happens to him, he earned it. They rode out of Denver in the clear cold of late November. 3 people who'd faced down a tyrant and won, heading home to a ranch that was truly theirs now, free and clear. Katie sang songs between them, making up verses about brave knights and defeated dragons, and neither adult corrected her imaginative version of events. The ranch looked exactly as they'd left it, but somehow different too. Coming over the rise and seeing the house and barn and corrals spread below them, Caleb felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just property anymore, it was home, hard-won and precious, and theirs. Mrs. Henderson met them at her ranch with Katie's things and news that she'd been checking on their place daily, that everything was fine, that the whole territory was talking about what they'd done. She hugged them both with fierce approval before sending them on their way. That night, after Katie was asleep clutching her wooden horse and dreaming of dragons, Caleb and Eliza sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the comfortable silence of people who'd fought together and won. The documents were filed, the threats were ended, and the future stretched ahead uncertain but free. So, Caleb said eventually, we survived. We did. Eliza wrapped her hands around her cup. Question is, what do we do now? Now? Caleb reached across the table, took her hand. Now we decide if this marriage stays a survival arrangement or becomes something real. I think it became real somewhere between chicken lessons and courtroom victories, Eliza said softly. I just don't know when exactly. Does it matter when? I suppose not. She looked at their joined hands, at the rings they'd worn for 3 months, that had started as shackles and become symbols of something else entirely. Caleb, I need to tell you something. When we started this, I thought I knew what I wanted. Independence, teaching, a life built on my own terms. But these past months with you and Katie, they've been the hardest of my life, and also somehow the best. Not because they were easy, but because they mattered. Because you made me feel like I mattered. Not as a burden or an obligation, but as a partner. As someone valued. You are valued. More than I knew how to say. Caleb stood, drew her up beside him. I married you because I was desperate, but I want to stay married to you because somewhere along the way, you became essential. Not just to the ranch or to Katie, but to me. You make me want to be better, work harder, fight for things I thought I'd lost forever. Like what? Like hope. Like happiness. Like the possibility of loving someone again, even though I thought that part of me died with Sarah. He touched her face gently. I don't love you the same way I loved her. That was young love, easy and passionate and uncomplicated. This is different. This is love built on respect and trust and choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. Is that enough for you? Eliza's eyes were bright with tears that finally spilled over. It's everything I never knew I wanted, everything I thought impossible. Then stay. Not because you have to, but because you want to. Stay and build this life with me. Be Katie's mother. Be my wife in truth. Let's make this forced marriage into something we both choose. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I choose this. I choose you. I choose us. He kissed her then, finally, 3 months late but exactly on time. Kissed her the way a man kisses a woman he's fought beside and come to love through earned respect and shared struggle. Kissed her until they were both breathless and laughing and holding each other in the warm kitchen that had become theirs. Should we tell Katie? Eliza asked, her head against his shoulder. Tell her what? That we're really married now? Caleb's voice held quiet amusement. I think she figured that out before we did. Probably. She's frighteningly perceptive. Eliza pulled back slightly. Caleb, I want to do this right. Start over. Make new promises. Not the ones we were forced to make, but ones we choose. Like renewing our vows? Exactly like that. Here, at home, with just us and Katie. No gains, no pressure, no desperation. Just us choosing each other. I'd like that. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. When? Christmas. Give us time to settle, to be sure. And if we're still certain on Christmas Eve, we'll speak vows we actually mean. Deal? Deal. They sealed it with another kiss, and outside the November wind rattled the shutters, while inside their house, Warmth and possibility were building into something that might actually last. The weeks before Christmas passed in a rhythm that felt almost miraculous after months of fear. News came that Gaines had been sentenced to 8 years in prison, his properties auctioned off to repay families he'd defrauded. Several families chose to return to lands they'd been forced to abandon. The Silver Ridge Land Company was dissolved, its corrupt practices exposed to sunlight that proved fatal. Caleb worked the ranch with new energy, making repairs that had been impossible when every dollar went to debt service. Eliza resumed teaching Katie and took on 3 other ranch children whose parents had heard about the former schoolteacher and begged for lessons. She transformed the front room into a makeshift classroom 2 afternoons a week, and the sound of children reciting lessons made the house feel alive in new ways. And gradually, carefully, Caleb and Eliza learned to be married for real. They moved Caleb's things into the larger bedroom, packed away Sarah's dresses with loving care, but made space for Eliza's few possessions. They learned each other's habits, preferences, the small intimacies that build marriage, how Eliza liked her coffee at dawn while Caleb preferred his after chores, how he carved small things when he was worried and she organized papers when she was anxious, how they both woke in the night sometimes, reaching for reassurance that this was real, that they were safe. Katie bloomed under their combined attention, growing confident and joyful in ways that reminded Caleb of who she'd been before Sarah died. She still kept her wooden horse, still talked about her first mama with love, but she'd made space for Eliza too. Called her Mama Liza to distinguish from Mama Sarah, and seemed completely content with having 2 mothers who loved her from different places. On Christmas Eve, snow fell soft and steady as Caleb, Eliza, and Katie stood before Reverend Morrison in their own front room. Agnes had ridden down from the way station to witness, along with Mrs. Henderson and Sheriff Tucker, who'd proven himself an ally in the final investigation. "We're gathered not to create a marriage," Morrison said, "but to celebrate and renew one, to let these 2 people speak vows freely chosen rather than forced by circumstance." Caleb took Eliza's hands, looked into her brown eyes that had gone from guarded to warm, and spoke words he'd been composing for weeks. "Eliza, when we met, I was desperate and you were cornered. We married out of necessity, not choice. But somewhere between survival and fighting for what's right, you became the person I most want beside me. You're fierce and smart and brave, and you make me better than I knew I could be. I choose you not because I have to, but because I want to. Because loving you is the best decision I've ever made. I vow to honor you, partner with you, and build a life that's worthy of the courage you showed in choosing to stay." Eliza's voice was steady, despite the tears on her cheeks. "Caleb, you gave me safety when I had none, respect when the world offered only condescension, and partnership when I expected only obligation. You showed me that marriage could be about choice and equality, not ownership. You made space for who I am instead of trying to shape me into something convenient. I choose you because you see me truly and love me anyway. I vow to stand beside you in struggle and success, to be Katie's mother, to build this life we've started into something lasting and true." They exchanged rings, new ones, bought in Denver with cattle money, chosen together rather than inherited or forced. When Morrison pronounced them husband and wife by choice and renewed commitment, and Caleb kissed Eliza properly in front of witnesses, Katie cheered loud enough to wake the chickens. That night, after their guests had left and Katie was asleep, Caleb and Eliza stood on their porch looking out at snow-covered fields that were theirs, at a future that was theirs to build. "Do you regret it?" Caleb asked. "Giving up independence, teaching full-time, the life you thought you'd have?" "Not for a moment." Eliza leaned against him. "I thought independence meant being alone. But real independence is choosing your bonds instead of having them forced on you. This, you and Katie and this ranch, this is what I choose. Every day I choose this." "Even when it's hard?" "Especially when it's hard. That's when choice matters most." They stood together in the quiet Christmas dark, 2 people who'd been forced together and chosen to stay, who'd fought dragons both figurative and real, who discovered that sometimes the worst circumstances led to the best outcomes if you were brave enough to fight for them. Inside, Katie dreamed of nights and victories, secure in the knowledge that both her mothers loved her and that families could be made, not just born. That courage was choosing to stand when falling was easier. That home was wherever people loved you enough to fight for you. And in the morning, Christmas would dawn on a ranch free of debt, a family built on choice, and a love that had grown in the hardest soil and bloomed into something strong enough to weather anything. 3 years later, on a spring morning bright with promise, Eliza stood in the garden plot behind the house, expanded now, productive, feeding their family and providing extras for trade, watching Katie teach her baby brother how to identify different plants. The boy was just over a year old, wobbling on uncertain legs but determined to follow his sister everywhere. Caleb emerged from the barn, crossed the yard with that easy confidence he'd regained, and wrapped his arms around Eliza from behind. "Happy anniversary," he murmured against her hair. "Which one?" She leaned back into his embrace. "Forced marriage or chosen one?" "Both. All of them. Every day I get to wake up next to you." Katie looked up from the garden, grinned at them with Sarah's eyes and Eliza's determination. "You two are being mushy again." "We're allowed," Caleb said. "Being married and all." "Real married, not just paper married," Katie clarified to her brother, who was trying to eat dirt. "They chose each other, which is the best kind." "The only kind that matters," Eliza agreed. That evening, after children were in bed and ranch work was done, Caleb brought out something he'd been working on secretly for months. A wooden box carved with roses and sage, their names intertwined on the lid. Inside, nestled in velvet, were two wooden figures, a rancher and a schoolteacher standing side by side. "I forgot how," he said softly. "My hands forgot after Sarah died. But you brought it back. You brought a lot of things back." Eliza traced the carved figures with gentle fingers. "It's beautiful. We'll keep it with the others." They did, adding it to the box that held Sarah's treasures, because this family was built on acknowledging the past while building the future, on honoring who they'd lost while celebrating who they'd found. And years later, when Katie was grown and telling her own children about the grandmother she remembered and the grandmother who raised her, she spoke of courage and choice, of a time when a desperate rancher and a cornered schoolteacher were forced together by a cruel man and chose to build something beautiful from broken pieces. She spoke of how her father learned to love again, how her second mother showed what strength looked like, and how sometimes the worst beginnings led to the truest love. Because in the end, that's what mattered. Not how they started, but how they chose to continue. Not the marriage that was forced, but the one they built every day through respect, partnership, and the kind of love that grew slowly and lasted forever. The ranch prospered, the family grew. And on quiet evenings, Caleb and Eliza would sit on their porch watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky, holding hands and remembering how far they'd come from that gray day in a banker's office when neither wanted the other and both were terrified of the future. "Would you do it again?" Eliza asked once, years into their marriage. "If you could go back, knowing everything that would happen, would you still marry me that day?" Caleb thought about fear and desperation, about fighting and choosing, about the woman beside him who'd become his everything. "Every time," he said, "I'd marry you every time. I'd choose you in every possible future." Even though we were forced? Especially because we were forced. Because it proved that love doesn't need perfect circumstances. It just needs people brave enough to build it. He kissed her hand, the one wearing the ring she'd chosen. "You taught me that. You taught me everything that matters." And Eliza, who'd been the dried-up spinster the town pitied, who'd been forced into marriage with a desperate stranger who'd fought dragons and won, Eliza smiled and held tight to the man who'd become her home and whispered the truth they'd learned together. "Love isn't what happens to you. It's what you choose to build. And I choose this. Every day, I choose this." The sunset faded to stars. The ranch settled into nighttime quiet. And inside the house that had been Sarah's and become Eliza's and belonged to both their memories, a family slept secure in the knowledge that they were loved, chosen, and safe, and that after everything was the only victory that truly mattered.